Hello, fifth grade, and welcome to Lesson 3 of Social Studies. This lesson is titled, How Are Native People of the Pacific Coast Shaped by Their Surroundings? In this lesson, you're going to use your investigative skills to find out how different groups of Native Americans were affected by their surrounding environments. Reading and talking about the geographic features of California, the Pacific Northwest, and the Arctic and subarctic will help you understand the differences in the cultures of the Native Americans who lived there. So here you can see a picture of Native Americans and how they used to hunt from canoes along the Pacific coast. All right, as always, let's go ahead and read our directions in the blue sidebars, and then we're going to get into our lesson. Look for number 1. Examine the image of a totem pole. Circle the figures depicted on the totem pole. Discuss with a partner what order the totems appear and what they might represent. So you can leave your notes here in this My Notes section. For number 2, find evidence, infer. What type of story might the totem pole tell? How do the totems and their order help tell that story? Think, where would you place this totem pole in a village so that its message would be best delivered? All right, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our photo here and then read through our first section. Ridicule totems, often used to shame individuals, appear upside down. So anytime they're basically trying to shame someone or look down on them, they would place them upside down on a totem pole. The images carved on totem poles are often human, animal, or spiritual forms that represent something important to a family. For example, some Native Americans have used wolves, eagles, and grizzly bears as symbols for their family. Totem poles also have also been carved in honor of an important person or events. Today, these structures are associated with Native Americans across the Pacific Northwest, but they originated with groups in southeastern Alaska, such as the Tlingit and Tsimshian. Totem poles vary in height, but most are 10 to 50 feet tall. They can be placed in front of a family's home or beside a grave site. Shorter ones may be kept inside the home. Totem pole carvings nearly died out in the late 1800s when the US government banned a number of Native American ceremonies. Native Americans revived this practice in the 1950s and continue to make totem poles today. Totem pole carvers usually make the poles from wood of red cedar trees. Before a tree is cut down, Native people hold a ceremony of respect and of respect and thanks for the use of the tree. On a pole, the top totem, called a crest, often shows which clan the family belongs to. An upside-down totem is sometimes included to make fun of an enemy. Most totems have oval shapes. The carver may use colors or patterns in the wood to help determine designs. So now that we've read through this section, we're going to go on to our next page, and we're going to focus on comparing and contrasting. So remember, when you compare and contrast things, comparing means you are looking at how things are similar. Contrasting is you deciding what things are different about them. So the best way to be able to compare and contrast things in the text is to read it carefully once, think about how it's organized, reread it and look for specific text features, and make notes on the chart. So we don't have a small graphic organizer on this page this time. We're going to jump directly into our larger graphic organizer, and we're going to take a look at pages 28 to 35 in our research companion. That's our textbook. We're going to use our skills to compare the Tlingit people with 2 other Native American groups from this lesson. So you can pick any 2. Consider where each group lived, its customs, and its artifacts. Use the Venn diagram to show things that are unique and common among these different groups. So in a Venn diagram, the outside ones are things that are specific to just that group. They're not shared with anyone else. Anytime there's an overlap, so this section right here would be the overlap between the Tlingit and whichever group you have down here. And then this overlap would be the similarities between these groups, and this would be the similarities between these 2 groups. This middle section is something that all 3 groups share. So we're going to begin reading on page 28 to 35 in our textbook. And as you go, make note and here in your workbook or on a separate sheet of paper. First, decide which groups you want to use after you've read it all the way through. Select the groups you want to use, and then you can begin filling in your Venn diagram, because then after you've read it once all the way through, you have a general idea of the information. When you go back to reread it, you can find specific details that you want to utilize for this graphic organizer. A variety of landscapes. Native Americans settled in a number of vastly different natural environments in the American West. Native Americans established settlements in the snowy Arctic regions of Alaska, the forested coasts of Oregon and Washington, and the arid deserts of Southern California. Surviving in each of these climates required very specific skills, and as a result, Native Americans across the American West developed unique ways of life. Ancestors of the Navajo and Apache people may have reached the Pacific Northwest about 5000 BC. Eventually, some of the descendants of these people migrated south, but others remained in the region. The Tlingit people belong to the same language family as the Navajo and Apache, meaning the groups share a common ancestor, but their surroundings have caused them to develop a very different way of life. Hand-woven baskets were an important tool of the Pomo life. So here we can take a look at the map. You can see the names of several of these tribes and the regions that they lived in. So the Native Americans of Alaska were up in the Alaskan region, and the Native Americans of the West were down from Canada all the way down to Southern California. Native Americans of California. The Native Americans of California can be divided into at least 6 distinct cultural regions: Northwestern, Northeastern, Central, Great Basin, Southern, and Colorado River. Groups in each area share cultural similarities. Some of these people living in the central region, for instance, speak similar languages. The location of each group directly affects their culture and their way of life. The Cahuilla, for example, built irrigation systems to raise crops in the desert basins in the south, while the Yurok, living along the northern coast, fished for most of their food. The Pomo are part of the Central Californian cultural area. Before encountering Europeans, the Pomo thrived by making use of the plentiful natural resources available in their region. The Pomo collected acorns, fished with nets and traps, and hunted deer, birds, and other small game. Round houses made from wood, earth, and grass functioned as homes and gathering places. Basket weaving played a large role in the Pomo life and traditions. Pomo baskets, often decorated with feathers and shells, are well known around the world for quality among art collectors. Baskets served a purpose in a number of aspects of the Pomo life, including cooking and childcare. Museums collect Pomo baskets as valuable works of art. Farther to the south, before the arrival of Europeans, groups in the Central Valley, including the Miwok, built their cultures around the region's resources. In the valley, Miwok hunters stalked deer, elk, and antelope. In the marshes, they set traps for otters and beavers. Forests may have been the most pivotal source of the Miwok way of life. Oak trees provided the Miwok with their staple product, the acorn. Children would shake loose acorns from the oak's upper branches, while women collected the fallen acorns in large baskets. The Miwok women ground the acorns into flour to make bread, biscuits, and soup. Southern California's desert do not have the same wealth of resources. There, groups such as the Cahuilla, Serrano, and the Chemehuevi adapted to use the few plants that grew in the desert. The Cahuilla also developed irrigation systems to raise crops, including corn, squash, beans, and melons. By digging ditches to feed into small lakes, the Cahuilla made use of the limited precipitation to sustain a vibrant culture. So far, what we've read tells us that depending on where these different tribes have lived, they developed very different lifestyles because they needed different strategies to be able to get food, to make shelters, to adapt to the environment they live in. Primary source: How the World Grew, Miwok Legend. In the beginning, the world was rock. Every year, the rain came and fell on the rock and washed off a little. This made earth. By and by, plants grew on the earth, and their leaves fell and made more earth. Then pine trees grew, and their needles and cones fell every year with the other leaves and bark and made more earth and covered more of the rock. If you look closely at the ground in the woods, you will see how the top is leaves and bark and pine needles and cones, and how a little below the top they are matted together, and a little deeper are rotting and breaking up into earth. This is the way the world grew, and it's growing still. And this is a translation of a Northern Miwok legend. All right, let's take a look at our next section. Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest. Native peoples of this region reside in communities along the Pacific coast from what is now British Columbia to Northern California. The ocean supplies seafood and plants for the groups of Native Americans living in the Pacific Northwest. Long ago, wood from the area's forest allowed these people to construct homes, carve canoes and masks, and fashion household items, including dishes and spoons. The Pacific Northwest people believed that all living things, including plants and animals, had rights and should be respected. They were careful to cut down only as many trees as they needed to continue their way of life. Chief Seattle was the leader of the Squamish and Duwamish people who lived in what is now northwestern Washington state. Seattle wanted to work with European settlers to coexist with a group of Native Americans living in the area. In 1855, Seattle agreed to give over his people's land to the US government and move to a reservation. The European settlers changed the name of the village to Seattle to honor him. When groups of Native Americans tried to take back their land by force, Chief Seattle kept his warriors out of the battle. He thought that facing the much larger force of settlers was not a good idea. He wanted to retain other lands for his people. Pacific Northwest groups, such as the Tlingit, carved totem poles as a way of chronicling their clan and family histories. Totem poles are made from long logs that are carved and decorated to represent people and animals. Each totem pole is made up of a series of 3 symbols called totems. The totems and their order often reflect the stories of the clans in the village. Tlingit and Chinook families often marked major life events, such as a wedding or a change of a leader, with a ceremony known as potlatch. At a potlatch, guests of the family receive gifts and enjoy feasting and music. The host is responsible for gift giving and sometimes can offer more than 100 presents at a single potlatch. The host receives respect and standing among the community as a result of his or her wisdom and appropriate generosity. Pacific Northwest people still hold potlatches today, and they are an important source of cultural identity to many people who lived in the region. The Maka people and their home on the shores of the Pacific Ocean and the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Though the Maka hunted many kinds of sea animals, including seals, porpoises, and sea otters, whale hunting held a special place in the Maka life. Maka canoes carrying as many as 60 hunters at a time would set out in search of whales. After a successful hunt, the Maka gave thanks for their triumph. Every part of the whale was used in different Maka activities. So here we can see a picture of a modern day potlatch that's still being held. Subarctic people. The subarctic region of North America stretches from Alaska to the Pacific Ocean to Newfoundland and Labrador on the Atlantic coast. Northern forests and marshlands known as the taiga covers large parts of the subarctic. Many subarctic people hunted by following the seasonal movement of moose and caribou and also fished for salmon. Hunters often used bows and arrows to set up traps to capture their prey. To protect from the cold, people made leggings, moccasins, and parkas from animal skins. Some groups set up temporary hunting and fishing camps of lean-to structures with sloped walls for shelter. During the long and snowy winter, some groups built more permanent structures. The Degziang in the western subarctic built partially below ground houses from wood and sod. Some subarctic groups along the Pacific coast had permanent villages run by councils of elders, but the groups farther inland were organized in smaller bands of family members. So let's take a look at our map here. The subarctic region is this green region here. Sub means below. So the purple is the Arctic region, and the subarctic is the area that's directly below it. Now, because these groups were living in harsh winter environments, their lifestyles were very different than people living along the coastline of California, where they had more temperate climates. These groups had much harsher climates. Food was a lot more scarce. They had to follow different migrating groups of animals to be able to get their food. Arctic peoples. Beyond the tree-covered taiga is a treeless zone of rocky soil and low-growing shrubs called the tundra. For most of the year, the Arctic is covered in ice and snow. The native peoples of the Arctic, such as the Inuit, Yupik, and Aleut, adapted to the extreme cold, making clothes from caribou furs and other animal hides. The winters are severe, with only a few hours of sunlight per day. During that time, many Arctic people constructed below-ground houses or snow block homes called igloos. They hunted seals, walruses, and whales along the coast. Many Inuit hunted with long spears called harpoons. The brief summers bring with them very long days of sunlight in which streams of water from the snow melt, attract migratory animals such as caribou and musk oxen. These animals were the primary hunting targets of Arctic people in the summer. Among some Inuit, the senior male was considered the clan chief. The chief of the strongest clan was the village chief. Some groups had no chief. Then and now, the Inuit community. The early Inuit did not exchange money for goods and services. Instead, they produced their own food, clothing, and other necessities. Because clan members had different skills, sharing and cooperation were essential for the early Inuits' way of life. Sharing is still a key element in Inuit society, but many Inuit today take part in a wage economy. An Inuit person might earn an income working for the local government or through some other profession. Hunting of caribou and seals still occur, but growing industries include tourism and real estate. Some Inuit earn money from selling sculptures, carvings, and prints. All right, let's go ahead and jump back into your book. So you're going to write about the Tlingit people in this circle right here, and then you're going to pick two of the other groups that we talked about. We talked about several different Native American groups. Pick two of them, find something that may be shared between two out of the three groups, find something that's shared among all of the groups, and neatly complete your graphic organizer. After you're done with that, we're going to go into our writing section. In our Write About It section, it says, take a stand, write and cite evidence. Compare the artifacts and housing of two Native American groups discussed in this lesson. In one paragraph, write an opinion about which group you think was best equipped to handle its surroundings and why. So pick two of the groups that we talked about, and you're going to write about which one had the best or sturdiest housing to survive in the environment that they lived in. And next, on the Connect to the Essential Question area, think about what you've learned about the native peoples of the Pacific Coast. Consider the location of major cities throughout the world. Explain why people tend to gather in certain areas using what you know about how native people of the Pacific Coast were affected by their surroundings. So think about where major cities are located and what common features you find there, and it'll help you understand why these Native American tribes also chose to organize their groups in particular regions. That takes us to the end of this lesson. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.